Tonight, when the temperature drops, you're going to turn up a thermostat. You won't think twice about it, but for most of human history, that thermostat didn't exist. When the sun went down in an Ice Age winter, the temperature outside could fall to minus 40 degrees Celsius. No walls, no coat from a store, no heater. Just your body, whatever you'd built with your hands, and about 12 hours of darkness to survive before the sun came up again. Most people assume our ancestors just toughed it out. They didn't. Toughness alone doesn't work at minus 40. Researchers estimate unsheltered exposure to real Ice Age wind chill could kill an unprepared adult through hypothermia in under 2 hours. That's not even enough time to finish a movie, let alone survive a season. So the real question isn't how ancient humans endured the cold. It's how they built an entire system out of bone, plant fiber, fat, and fire that let them beat those odds night after night for tens of thousands of years. And the answer starts somewhere you would not expect. It starts with a skeleton. Stick around, because by the end of this, you're never going to complain about your thermostat again. Let's start with shelter, because most people picture Ice Age humans living in caves, and that picture is mostly wrong. Deep caves are rare. They only occur in specific rocky landscapes, which means most of the population living across the open plains of Ice Age Europe and Asia never had one nearby. And even when people did use them, there was a catch nobody expects. Deep cave interiors sit at a fairly fixed temperature that roughly tracks the regional yearly average, which in glacial Europe still hovered close to freezing. Not warm, just steady. And the stone walls tend to pull heat away from a fire rather than hold on to it, acting less like insulation and more like a very large, very unhelpful ice cube. So on the open steppes of what is now Ukraine and Russia, where there were no caves and almost no trees, people looked around at the only large resource available and built houses out of it: woolly mammoths. At a site called Mezhirich, archaeologists uncovered a circular dwelling built from the remains of at least 149 individual mammoths, not decorated with bones. Built from them, heavy jawbones stacked as a foundation, long bones layered as walls, curved tusks arched overhead and locked together into a dome, then covered in stitched hide to trap warm air underneath. Somewhere out there, an Ice Age realtor was describing this as cozy, 149 mammoths, great bones, motivated seller. At a second site, Kostenki 11, in Russia, someone built a bone ring over 12 meters wide, using nearly 3,000 bones pulled from at least 64 different mammoths. Archaeologists still disagree about what that structure actually was. A home, a communal meat processing site, possibly something closer to a gathering hall. What isn't in dispute is the engineering itself. People with no metal tools and no written blueprints figured out how to build load-bearing architecture out of megafauna skeletons, sturdy enough to survive open plains blizzards, and some of these structures show signs of being reoccupied across generations. But a windproof skeleton house still gets cold on the inside if there's nothing burning in it. And this is where the story gets genuinely clever. In a landscape with almost no trees, you've got an obvious fuel problem. What do you burn when there's no wood? The answer, again, was bone. Specifically, the spongy interior tissue found in joints and vertebrae, soaked in marrow and fat. Solid bone barely burns, but that greasy, porous bone lights easily with a small starter bed of charcoal, and it behaves almost like a natural fire log. A steady flame while the fat burns off, then a glowing coal bed that can hold heat for hours afterward. Experimental archaeologists tested this directly, burning hundreds of kilograms of bone across dozens of controlled fires, and recorded several hours of sustained radiant heat from what is essentially a burning skeleton. Placement mattered just as much as fuel. At a Neanderthal site in Spain called Abric Romani, researchers found a row of small hearths spaced with almost suspicious precision, roughly 1 meter from the back wall and 1 meter apart from each other. Close enough to warm sleeping bodies, far enough to avoid setting bedding alight, positioned so the rock wall behind absorbed heat during the evening and radiated it back overnight. That looks a lot like deliberate thermal design, and it's roughly 50,000 years old. Indoor fire brought its own danger, though: smoke. Reconstructions in a cave in England showed that fires near the entrance kept the air breathable and pushed smoke out along the ceiling, while the same fire moved to a rear chamber made the space unlivable within about 20 minutes. So cave mouths, shallow overhangs, and open structures with smoke holes weren't just preference. In a lot of cases, they were the only option that didn't slowly poison you in your sleep. And there's a real debate buried in all of this. Could Neanderthals strike fire on demand? Or were they mostly harvesting natural wildfires and keeping embers alive as long as possible? Evidence of fire use seems to drop during the coldest glacial stretches, which some researchers take as a sign Neanderthals simply ran out of options. Others point to ancient chunks of iron pyrite showing wear marks from being struck against flint, plus manganese dioxide that experiments show can lower the ignition point of dry tinder, a Stone Age fire kit, quite possibly with a chemical accelerant built in. Nobody's settled it. Maybe both were true, in different places, at different times. Now, clothing, because this might be the most underrated invention in the entire story. Not fire, not architecture. A sewing needle. Warmth from clothing is measured in a unit called klo. 0 is bare skin. Surviving a resting night in extreme cold requires somewhere around 7 or 8 klo. A simple hide, draped over the shoulders and tied at the neck, the kind of garment associated with Neanderthals, gets you maybe 1 to 2. Nowhere close. The problem isn't the material, it's the gaps. Wind and movement pump cold air straight through the openings and strip out whatever warmth had built up underneath. Basically a cape with the air conditioning on. Now compare that to what shows up in the records starting around 40,000 years ago. Eyed bone needles. Small, precise tools that let modern humans do something Neanderthal sites, so far, show no clear evidence of so tight, windproof seams. Suddenly you're not draping a hide over your body, you're building a fitted, multi-layered suit. Inner tunic, trousers, hooded parka, boots, mittens, all stitched closed at the wrists, ankles, and neck to trap a sealed pocket of warm air. Tailored ensembles like that can reach 5 to 8 klo, close to what's needed to sleep through -30 and see the sun come up. The clearest proof comes from a burial site in Russia called Sungir, dated to roughly 34,000 years ago. An adult man and 2 children were buried with more than 13,000 carved ivory beads arranged in precise lines across their skeletons. The fur clothing itself rotted away millennia ago, but the beads never moved because they'd been sewn directly onto the garments. By mapping exactly where each bead landed, researchers reconstructed the whole outfit: a pullover fur parka with a hood, trousers stitched continuously into boots, a beaded cap, a full cold weather suit, rebuilt from 34,000-year-old jewelry, either the most impressive forensic reconstruction in archaeology or the world's slowest fashion recall. But here's the twist almost nobody mentions. This system had a flaw, and it wasn't the cold, it was sweat. A day of hunting can generate several times the body's resting heat output, and sweat soaking into a sealed fur suit fills the tiny air pockets doing the actual insulating. Water conducts heat away roughly 20 times faster than dry, trapped air. So the moment activity stopped and the temperature dropped, that damp fur could freeze against the skin, turning the exact garment meant to save your life into a hazard instead. Which is why tailored parkas came with drawstrings and adjustable openings. Vent while working, seal it tight before sleep. 34,000 years ago, and they'd already solved the problem every modern hiker still complains about on the trail. Everything else, the ground, the bugs, the bodies packed together, the predators outside the firelight, moved just as fast once the big 3 were solved. Sleeping on bare stone could drain body heat almost as fast as the open air, so people built mattresses, thick beds of ash topped with grass at Sibudu Cave in South Africa, roughly 200,000 years ago, the ash doubling as insect deterrent. At Sibudu Cave, around 77,000 years ago, layered sedge and rush bedding was topped with leaves from a plant containing natural insect-repelling compounds, and periodically burned and rebuilt to keep the sleeping area clean. A full sanitation cycle running in a Stone Age bedroom, long before anyone understood what a germ was. Group sleeping did its own quiet work too. Bodies huddled together reduced the total surface area exposed to cold air, trapping a shared pocket of warmth. And living floor excavations show sleeping areas kept clean and separate from work zones, arranged in rows between hearths and heat-reflecting walls. Outside that circle were cave hyenas, cave lions, and cave bears, and humans pushed back with fire at entrances that predators tended to avoid, narrow choke-point doorways, and, notably, very early proto-dogs, canid skulls from sites across Europe, dated to roughly 31 to 36,000 years ago, already showing early signs of domestication, though scholars still debate exactly how dog they were. Either way, a keen nose and a set of teeth growling at the dark was an early warning system nothing else could match. The first home security system, and it also wanted belly rubs. And underneath the technology, bodies adapted too. Populations under sustained cold stress across generations tend to develop stockier frames and shorter limbs, reducing surface area relative to mass, a pattern Neanderthals fit closely. Their unusually wide, deep nasal cavities, once considered a mystery, turn out to have given them more internal surface area to warm and humidify freezing air before it reached the lungs. And infants, who lose heat far faster than adults and can barely shiver, survived almost entirely because of caregivers, fur pouches worn skin to skin, and the warmest spot in camp, tucked between adult bodies and a heat-reflecting wall. None of this made cold survivable on its own, though. Metabolism and anatomy bought time. They didn't grant immunity. Without shelter, fire, and clothing, core body temperature still drops dangerously within hours of true sub-zero exposure. Biology was the backup generator. Culture was the power grid. So the next time the temperature drops and you reach for a thermostat without a second thought, consider this. Somewhere on a frozen plain 20,000 years ago, someone lay down inside the ribcage of a mammoth under stitched hide, on a bed of ash and grass, beside a fire built from burning bone, and survived a night that should have killed them. We didn't inherit that from luck. We inherited it from people who refused to lose to the dark. And if stories like this one are your thing, hit subscribe, tap share, and send this to the one friend who still complains about their apartment being cold. This has been Paint the Ages. See you in the next one.